Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, go to 147. We're going to review the Mishnah that we started last time. Excuse me. So it's there towards the top of the page. Hamikabel sadeh mechavero. So you receive a field from your fellow. This is going to be a leasing agreement or a rental agreement. Okay, then the mikabel there, that's what it means, as opposed to purchasing. It's not a purchasing. It's a leasing sharecropper arrangement. V'hi beit hashlachim o beit ha'ilan. And it's an irrigated field. Interesting, if you're curious about the Hebrew there, for the irrigated field, shlachim is the water gets sent down from a higher place. There's a stream of some kind. That's where you get the word. Like there's a stream in Israel called Mea Shiloach, which is the sent down stream, and it just means a stream that goes downhill that was used to irrigate fields. Irrigation obviously is not a modern technique. It's an ancient farming technique. So they knew about irrigation channels, things like that. Anyhow, so the field that you're leasing is an irrigated field that's got a water source. O Beit Ha'ilan, or it's an orchard. Now, when it says orchard, it doesn't really mean orchard. It means that you are leasing the field for reasons other than the trees. And we talked about that before, right? So it's a wheat field, your main crop is wheat. There happens to be fruit trees and things like that on there. And we talked about that already. There may be some, well, you have to come up with some arrangement about how you're going to split the fruit as well as the crops itself. But the fact is that the main crop is not going to be, it's not an orchard. So it happens just to have some trees. That's important. So it becomes important later. Okay. Yaveh Shamayan. Okay. So the water source dries up. Conditions change. It was an irrigated field, but the source of irrigation dried up. The Mayan is the stream of some kind that was feeding the field, irrigating the field. V'niktzatza ilan. Or the trees suddenly aren't giving fruit anymore. Okay, so the conditions change. It's one or the other. They're not related. It's not because the water source dried up, so therefore the trees aren't giving fruit anymore. It's just that there's something goes wrong with the trees. There's a tree virus or fire or something like that. So you're not getting. So in both cases, you're not getting the income. You as the renter are not getting the income that you expected. Right? That's clear. You, despite that, you were not allowed to lower the amount of rent you pay. You had a certain rental agreement, and conditions change. You still have to pay the rent. Okay? So even though you may have been counting on the fruit trees to supplement, so therefore you could afford the rent, or you certainly were counting on the water to irrigate the field because that's going to affect the crop, but conditions change. It doesn't matter. You signed an agreement. You have to pay it. Okay?
Right. It's an act of God kind of.
Yeah, so we could call it that, although the Gemara later will, right, exactly, right.
They are insurance work.
Yeah, that's right. No, there's familiar conditions here, in our own leasing agreements. But so ima marlo, but this is important. So if you said, so in other words, if you specified in the agreement, ima marlo, chachor li sadeh beit hashlachim zo. If you say, and then the implication here is that it's in the rental agreement, you say, I am leasing from you this irrigated field. So all you have to have is the term irrigated field in the contract itself. You don't have to have the condition, and if the irrigation source dries up, then I can lower the rent. But all you have to have in the agreement itself is the term, Beit HaShlachim, the irrigated field, O Ste Beit Ailanze, or this field that includes these trees. So if you have the word trees in the rental agreement, then Yaveh Shemayan v'Niktzatze Ilan, then if the irrigation dries up, or the trees die, the trees aren't giving fruit anymore, then Minakelo Mechachoro. At that point, you can lower your rent. Okay? So just a generic rental agreement that doesn't mention an irrigated field, doesn't mention trees, you can't lower the rent. You as the leasee, the person renting, can't lower but all you have to do, you don't have to have it specifically mentioned that I will lower the rent. Just the fact that you're renting an irrigated field means that you're expecting the irrigation. And once you're expecting the irrigation, once you don't get it, you can lower your rent, or you're expecting the fields. Okay? So you don't, again, it's interesting. Yeah, all you have to have is those terms in there. And once the terms are in there, there is an expectation that, okay, I was expecting this, and what's fair is for me to lower my rent. Okay, because I expected you to include that.
But is that done without any negotiations? If that's the case?
Oh, so yes, I mean that's a good question. We're going to get to that. The question is, how much can you lower the rent? It doesn't say that. It just says you're allowed to lower the rent. There might be a formula that we'll come up with. Okay. Any other questions about that's the Mishnah. Okay, next page.
So it's not a sharecropping.
It is a sharecropping. It is a sharecropping. So if it's a sharecroppings are generally percentage.
Right.
So then you can lower your percentage. I was giving you 30%, I'm going to give you 20%.
Oh, in addition, 20% or less.
Yeah. Because, the assumption also is the sharecropper has to live. So if he's giving away too much, he's not going to be, there's a point he's not going to be able to live. And if there's no water irrigating the field. So, but you're right to point out that there's a difference between renting. Right, renting and a percentage. So, and that's important because we're going to come to that. Renting is a fixed amount, $200 a month for the field, no matter what I get from the field, or 20% of the crops. If there's a lot, that's a lot. If there's not very much, it's not very much at all. Okay, this I can tell you because I've read ahead. This applies to both. This applies to the fixed amount and also to percentage. The person who is renting the field, the sharecropper, can lower what they pay the owner if these conditions change.
Question of equitability.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
They both share in the loss.
They both share in the loss. Yeah, it's a good way of putting it too. Yeah. Okay. All right. Page 148. Gemara. Hechidami. Okay. So hechidami always means be more specific about the situation. What is this like? Literally means what is this like, but give me the specifics of what type of situation are we talking about. So here it says it, Ilema Diyavash Nahara Rabba. If we're saying that a big river, that's Nahara Rabba, dried up. So there's a big river. It's not some local pond that the owner owns, but it's the Nile River. It's a big river that irrigates so it's not going to just irrigate this one guy's field. It's going to irrigate all sorts of fields, every field in the area. In that case, he should be able to, even if he didn't specify it, he should be able to lower the rent. Why? Because we would call that makat medinahi. That is a disaster that's afflicting the entire area. Medina, in modern Hebrew, is country, but it doesn't really mean country necessarily. I don't know they had country so much in those days either, but they had big areas, county. Principality, right. So this is affecting everybody. So now, we're not going to go there. Actually, we could read this too. I mean, if you say, rather a regional disaster, I'm going to just read what Steinsaltz says. In which case, I'm entitled to deduct my loss from the rent. This is just Steinsaltz here. For we have learned in a Mishnah below, if someone loses a field from another person and is consumed by locusts or swept by storms, if it is a regional disaster, he can deduct from the rent. So the law, the Torah, we could say, treats regional disasters differently from local disasters. Why, just off the cuff, do you think that would be? Okay, so and I'm gonna there's two. Well, let me just so here's the two possible situations. Is you have a pond nearby, and it's just enough really to irrigate the one guy's field. So that dries up for all sorts of reasons. Not enough rain, you didn't take care of the pond, whatever it might be. Or you've got the big raging river that dries up everybody's field, right? That affects everybody. So irrigation for everybody's field in the vicinity is affected. You treat them differently by law. Why would you treat them differently? Now one answer is it affects everybody. Okay, but if it affects everybody, then it could say, well, nobody gets to lower their rent.
Is this the act of God equivalent?
Well, so I want to play that out a bit.
But in the case of the pond, it's as if the pond, whether it belongs to the owner of the land or not, but this is specifically the source. So the person who leases the land depends on it very specifically.
Yeah. So the person who leases the land has responsibility to look and make sure that the pond is okay. And then when he's leasing it, he's got to make that right. Exactly. I mean, he's taking that risk. He's risking that pond. Now, you can't say he's risking the Nile River is going to dry up because he figures, we would call that an act of God, something totally unexpected. But it might be that pond drying up is not totally unexpected. Take a look at that pond. Does that pond really look good for you? Now, then, what he can decide to do then is put it in the rental agreement and say, hey, I'm not so sure about this pond, so I'm depending on this pond for irrigation. And all he has to do is, so at that point, then he's protected himself. Okay, so what we have here is the responsibility of the renter to really inspect the property well. And once they've inspected the property well, to make sure that they're putting that in the lease agreement. Whereas nobody would have the expectation that the Nile River is going to dry up. He's not going to go and inspect the entire Nile River. Okay, the same thing with this locust and some of those things you don't necessarily expect. And there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, so if you have this little pond, you'll see that he could say, hey, before I rent this land from you, let's make sure this pond is sustainable. Right. Sustainability, right? Always comes up. All right. Amar Rav Papa. So Rav Papa says, our Mishnah is not referring to a big raging river. Amar Rav Papa, de Yavesh Nahara Zuta. It's referring to a small little river. So a local river. De Amarle. So he says to him, because the owner then could say, so it's a small river, and the owner could say, Ibayalach la tua bedavla. So the owner could say, you should provide irrigation yourself. You're not allowed to lower the rent that you pay me. This is just a little river. And by the way, you should have looked at the little river before you rented the land. And now you're having a hard time with water, so go get some water yourself. Go to the Nile and get the water and water it yourself. But it's not. This is not the raging Nile. You knew it was just a tiny little river when you rented the land. And so at that point, you should have put it in the agreement. Now you're telling me you want to lower the rent. So I'm telling you, you've got other options. You can now provide the water yourself. Actually, the word there is davla. Go get a bucket. Go get a bucket and provide and water the field yourself. Okay, so
this is all
these are days before global warming, but certainly not days before drought. I mean, they knew about drought and the lack of rain and locusts and living in uncertainty with the climate.
This is all presuming that none of this was a cause of the owner of the property.
Yeah. Okay. Amar Rav Papa. So here we get to something we talked about before. So Rav Papa says, who was just speaking too. So Rav Papa is the guy that solved the issue for us. Is that we're talking about a small water source. But he says, Hani tarte matnita kamaita. All right, so the two Mishnahs we've studied so far. You've already forgotten the first Mishnah. We've only studied two. The first Mishnah was already 6 weeks ago, so nobody remembers what the first Mishnah was about. Anybody remember what it was about? I was joking.
Thank you very much.
Well, the first Mishnah was all about local custom. That you pay according to local custom. So the first Mishnah, now the second Mishnah is changing circumstances. If suddenly there's no water source or the trees dry up. So both these Mishnahs, he's saying, function for bein bechachranuta. They work for either a chachranuta, is a fixed rent. So $200 a month no matter what. So they work for that. Or bein bekablanuta. Kablanuta is a sharecropping arrangement. So in other words, just understand that there's two possibilities for paying rent. One is the sharecropping arrangement, which is a percentage of the crop, and the other is just a fixed amount. So the Mishnahs we study apply to both.
Well, we have that today. It's called the base rent and the percentage rent.
Yeah, that's right.
They're both incorporated in the lease today.
Yeah, that's right.
It's the only thing you sign today.
Yeah.
It's a base and a percentage. I mean, it's nothing unusual. There's no revelation in here.
Right. Now, but you could imagine different laws that would apply differently. Yeah. So this is saying the two Mishnahs we've studied so far, even though they don't actually mention whether it's a base or a percentage, they don't mention that. They apply to both. They apply. There's going to be some Mishnahs which only apply to one or the other, and we'll have an example. We'll have some examples. But here they apply to both. Okay, I'll go on. Oh yeah, so mikan ve'elach. So from now on, they're saying, so the Mishnahs that we haven't studied yet, but we're going to study. What's interesting about the Gemara is that the Gemara comes in and comments on particular Mishnahs, but somehow the Gemara has this all-knowing voice where it knows what the next Mishnahs are going to be. We don't yet because we haven't read them yet. But the editors of the Gemara, know they've read they read the entire Mishnah and then they comment one by one. So when we're reading it, they're predicting the future. The Mishnahs that you're going to read, so mikan ve'elach. De'ita b'kablanuta, leita b'chachranuta. So in the coming Mishnahs that we're going to study, what will work for a percentage doesn't necessarily work for a fixed amount, and vice versa. And it says ude'ita b'chachranuta, leita b'kablanuta, and what works for a fixed amount doesn't work for a percentage. Okay, so the coming Mishnahs are not going to work for both arrangements. Okay, is that clear? Okay. Now we're going to go on. Ima Morley. This is now we're quoting from the Mishnah we just studied. Ima Marlo. So and Marlo says, it's interesting. It says, but obviously we're talking about in the leasing agreement. Ima Marlo chachor li sadeh beit hashluchim zeh. If you say you specify this is an irrigated field, v'chule and imai. Okay, so why do you have to specify it? Lema le. So the owner could say, I like this. This is an interesting thing. Shma ba'alma amrei lach. So remember the rule is if you specify in the agreement an irrigated field and the irrigation dries up, then the renter can say, I'm going to lower my rent. Now, what this is actually an anonymous Mishnah, but the anonymous rabbi says, well, that shouldn't be the case. Even if you specify it, the owner then can say, no, I just gave you the name of the field. The name of the field is called irrigated field. That's the name of the field. Just because it's called irrigated field doesn't mean it's irrigated. That's just what that's the name. And by the way, I was reading this and I was thinking of, that happens all the time. Sometimes things have names which actually don't specify what they are. A classic example in our neighborhood is La Jolla Farms. La Jolla Farms. I mean, I was walking through La Jolla Farms with one of my relatives, and she said, "Gosh, I would live on a farm if this was a farm. I'll move into a farm. Like La Jolla Farms doesn't have farms, but we call it La Jolla Farms because it used to have farms. So sometimes that happens. Like you take on a name of something. So you buy a house on La Jolla Farms and you move in and you think, hey, where's the wheat? Where's my wheat crop? And the realtor says, are you crazy? These are homes. These don't have wheat crops. We just call it La Jolla Farms. So he's saying that could be the case with this leasing agreement. Just because the field is called irrigated field doesn't mean it's an irrigated field. It might mean somewhere in the distant past it was an irrigated field. So you have to specify, that's what he's suggesting. You have to specify beyond the name. You actually have to specify this irrigated field, and I depend on this particular lake for this particular amount of irrigation. It's got to be more specific than the name of the field. At least that's what he's suggesting.
In English, you give things called capitalizations.
So called what?
Capitalization.
Capitalization.
In other words, La Jolla Farms is a...
Oh, I see. Right.
That's a classic.
Yeah. Hebrew doesn't have capital letters, right? Yeah.
Rabbi, there was an example of this in last night's news.
Yeah.
Hellman's is suing a company that come out with the name Mayo.
Right.
Yeah. Oh.
Mayonnaise has to have eggs in it.
Yeah.
Mayo. That's definition.
Yeah.
It's on the shelf.
Yeah. Parmesan cheese. Parmesan cheese is not. So people from Parma, are suing the whole world. It's not Parmesan cheese because it's not from Parma. But then, I know. So a name doesn't necessarily specify. Like this is, and really in some ways they're saying we're just protecting the consumer because the consumer's going to see Parmesan and they're going to think it's from Parma. So you're cheating them. Me as a consumer, I don't even know where Parma is. But at some point, there was the origin. So this is actually the same thing. I mean, it's saying don't assume the name tells you what it is. It could just be a name. Okay.
By the way, Parma is a small town south of...
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Oh, yes. Now they actually give an example. So we have all these examples, La Jolla Farms, Parmesan cheese. They says, Mi lo Tanya, because it says in a Mishnah, Ha'omer lechaveiro, Beit kor afar ani mocher lecha. I'm giving you a field that's called Beit kor. The place of core. Core is a unit of measurement. So it implies it takes a certain amount of seed in this field, a unit of seed. And it may be that it used to, but at this point that's just the name of the field. So Beit Kor Farni Merchelecha Afal Pi, even though She'en Bo Eloletech. But still you only need a different type of seed for it. And Higio, it counts as the seed. It counts as a field. In other words, the sale counts. So even though the field is called something that it's not, somehow picked up a name over the course of the centuries, it required a different amount of seed. So if the name of the field is Beit Kor, but in fact it requires a whole different kind of seed, the sale is a valid sale. Right, because obviously as the consumer you go and you check it out and you ask the owner, well, how many seed? I know it's called Beit Kor, but what kind of seeding does it need? So you do your due diligence rather than just looking at the name. The name itself, the owner shouldn't have to expect that that's all the due diligence you're going to do is just look at the name. The owner has the right to expect that you're going to look into it, ask how much seed, and if you don't, it's your problem. Yes.
But the Hoya Farms
Yeah.
and irrigated is recognized by more than just the owner as the name of the place.
Yeah.
Irrigated field. This is this is not recognized by anybody except the owner who is trying to make something out of it.
Not necessarily. I mean, no, not necessarily. I mean, things that the Hidden Valley.
Yeah.
Is one of my jokes when I'm with my kids. Hidden Valley, it's not hidden anymore. It's they're not hiding it. They called it Hidden Valley. So, but at some point it was a Hidden Valley. So at some point that was the name. It's certainly not hidden anymore. It's on a map. We all know where it is. So that's what happens. So sometimes irrigated field. The irrigated field, it stopped being irrigated, but that was the name. Now, when did that happen? When did it become known as? When did it become known as that? And at what point wasn't it irrigated anymore? I guess the rabbis are saying it doesn't matter. That the owner has to go and check. The renter has to go check it out. Don't just rely on the name in the document.
This argument just doesn't hold. I mean, it's not recognized by anybody else.
No, the assumption that it is. The assumption is that it is.
All these examples you give is recognized by people. That people know that there's a hidden valley, and there's more than one person calls it Hidden Valley. If the owner is calling this irrigated field because it serves his purpose and never did that before, I mean that's.
So I think you're assuming that the owner does it. I'm not sure that's the case. I think there could just be a misunderstanding that you bought a field, and you didn't live there, and you didn't realize that the term Hidden Valley. I thought it meant Hidden Valley. I thought that nobody would ever be able to find me. And now suddenly, so there's just a misunderstanding. I don't think you necessarily have to assume fraud here, but it does raise the question as when do these things become? So it's just saying, since we don't know when these things sort of become popular parlance, then if you're renting something, it's your responsibility to check it out. At least, by the way, that's what he's suggesting. We're always in the middle of an argument, so we're still in the middle of the argument. We'll see how it comes out. Yeah.
So this argument is making me think of Nachal David. Once my sister took me to a place in Israel with Nachal David, David's body.
Right.
I mean, it's still called that.
Right.
Do we know that David ever?
No, we're pretty sure that David never wasn't there, but it still has that name.
Still,
right.
That's the
name
David
of
also. That
right.
little, almost absent creek.
Yeah.
How about Bethel?
Yeah. Let's not go there. So I'm going to just finish this verse 8. V'hu demit karei beit kor. It just happens to be called beit kor, the place of the kor's amount of seed, but it's not the amount of seed it really requires. Okay, let's turn the page. We're almost done. Oh yeah, and then it goes on. Karma ani mocher lecha af al pi she'en bo kfanim. There could be a field that's called vineyard, and in fact it's not a vineyard. It's just the name of the field. Higio. So that counts as a sale.
It used to be called by somebody else other than the owner.
Yes.
Yeah.
By the.
Well, they did. They do say that because I'm going to go Shalom Acharlo Ela Shema. Let me finish that because it applies to what you just said. He just sold him the name of something. V'hu demit karei karma, and it became called. So this applies that some time has passed. And it's called in pop. It can't just be the owner names it.
Yes.
It's got to be called, and there's got to be sort of some sense that this is what it's called. Like Beit HaKerem in Israel. Beit HaKerem is a neighborhood in Israel. There are no vineyards in there. Clearly, at some point, there were vineyards, right? And that's why it was called that, but it's not anymore. So if you buy a house in Beit HaKerem and you show up and you say, "Hey, where are my grapes?" You're not going to get any grapes. It's an urban neighborhood. There are no grapes. So you should have checked that out. And mitkare, that happens to be what it's called. So that's
sour
the
grapes.
Yeah. Sour grapes. Okay. Same. So it goes on. It gives a few other examples. Pardes ani mocher lecha. I'm selling you a field called orchard.
Right.
Right. Hidden orchard. It's also Hidden Orchard is a shopping mall in Skokie. It's not hidden, and it's Old Orchard. Excuse me, Old Orchard. It's not old, it's new, right? And it's an orchard. It's not an orchard. So you buy something called Old Orchard, and you're expecting old apple trees. You're getting a Target. You're getting a mall. That's what you're getting. I think it is interesting to me how often this appears. It's a very common thing that things take on names of old functions, and the Mishnah, the Gemara is picking up that this happens. So just writing something in a lease is not enough. So afal pisha in bo rimonim, even though it doesn't have. So actually, the word pardes used to actually originally pardes, which now means orchard, used to just refer to an orchard of pomegranates. Then later it became expanded to any kind of fruit. That's interesting too. So that also could be. So I bought an orchard from you. Where are my pomegranates? And the guy says, no, we don't use that anymore. We use the term orchard now can mean any kind of fruit. Look at the oranges and the apples. So it teaches you again to specify in your contract what and check it out. Like don't just expect pomegranates without visiting. Higio, shalom machar lo el shma. So it gets specifies all he sold you is the name of the thing. V'hu demit kare pardasa, and it's called pardes. All right. Alma, therefore, amarle shma ba'alma amrelach. So we learned from this, and this back to our case, all you bought was the name of the field, irrigated field, and irrigated field. Okay, so now, hachi nami nemale. So sir, in our case, you should be able to say to the person, shma ba'alma amrelach. All I sold you was a name. Okay. Now, in other words, Rav Papa brings us all up and says, this should be a consideration. I want to remind you that despite this whole discussion, that's not the law. The law is, if it's written in the document, he is allowed to lower the rent. So all Rav Papa is bringing is an objection and saying, just because you wrote it in the document, that shouldn't necessarily mean that he should lower the rent, because maybe that's the name of the field. In fact, we're going to find out that's not a good argument, despite all my wonderful examples, Hidden Valley, Old Orchard, La Jolla Farms. In this particular case, it's not a good example. So we'll get to that next week.